Today we are walking through the paper Mixture of Depths Attention.
Give me the big picture first.
This paper asks a depth scaling question for large language models. As transformers get deeper, useful features from early layers can be diluted by repeated residual updates. The authors propose Mixture of Depths Attention, or MODA, so each head can read both the current sequence context and depth memories from earlier layers.
So what exactly breaks in earlier depth scaling designs?
The paper contrasts three ways of moving information across layers. Residual connections are cheap and stable, but they keep compressing the whole history back into one fixed width tensor. That repeated superposition makes earlier signals harder to recover in late layers, which is the signal degradation problem the paper wants to fix.
If residual paths lose information, why not keep every layer stay?
Depth-dense connections do that, and they avoid compression, but they pay a steep price. They connect every layer to every later layer. The connectivity pattern is fixed instead of data-dependent, and the dominant computation grows much faster. So the paper looks for something more selective than dense links and more expressive than residual addition. The key move is depth attention, then MODA. For a token at layer L, the query can look at sequence keys and values from the current layer, and also at depth keys and values from the same token position in earlier layers. That gives the model a retrieval path back into its own depth history.
What do sequence KV and depth KV mean here?
Sequence KV is the usual attention context inside the current layer. Depth KV is a cache of keys and values saved from earlier layers at the same token position. MODA normalizes both sources in one attention step, so a head can decide whether the best evidence is in the current context window or in older layer representations. The paper writes the depth read as this equation.
In that equation, what should I read first?
Read it as the input to layer L is built by attention. The query comes from the previous layer, and the keys and values come from historical depth states. The point of the equation is that depth history is retrieved by attention rather than merged blindly by addition, which is exactly how the paper tries to preserve useful signals. This method figure makes the idea concrete. Standard causal attention only reads along the sequence axis, but MODA adds a second source of memory from previous layers at the same position. The important part is that this retrieval is data-dependent, so the model can pull depth information when it helps instead of paying for full dense cross-layer mixing.
Why do the authors treat this as a middle ground between older designs?
Because the paper places MODA between two extremes. Residual connections are efficient but lossy. Dense depth connections preserve everything, but are expensive and rigid. Depth attention reads historical representations adaptively, and MODA upgrades that idea by combining depth attention with standard sequence attention in one operator. The authors also argue that the algorithm has to fit GPU reality. A naive implementation would read historical depth states through non-cathedral memory excesses, which wastes hardware throughput. Their chunk-aware depth KV layout reorganizes the cache so each query block scans a shorter, more regular span and shares the same online softmax state with the sequence spot.
What does that hardware reorganization buy in practice?
It makes the new attention pattern close to the cost envelope of flash attention style kernels. The paper reports 97.3% of flash attention to efficiency at sequence length 64K, which is strong evidence that the method is not only mathematically appealing but also implementable at long contexts.
Once they train models with it, what improves first?
On the main comparison against OL mode to at 1.5 billion parameters, MODA gets lower C for validation loss and stronger downstream scores on HELISWAG. We know GLAND, and ARC challenge. So the method improves both language modeling quality and task performance, not just one proxy metric.
How large is the average gain across the broader evaluation?
The abstract summarizes the broader result clearly. Average perplexity improves by 0.2 across and validation benchmarks. Average downstream performance rises by 2.11% across 10 tasks. And the added compute is only 3.7% FLOPS. The paper also says post-norm works better with MODA than pre-norm. One more useful piece of evidence comes from the attention visualization.
What do these heat maps tell us?
In middle and late layers, some heads stay sharp on local sequence structure while still spending part of their probability on depth slots. That makes the mechanism more believable, because the visualization matches the claim that MODA retrieves useful cross-layer information instead of acting like a decorative, architectural change.
What still looks unresolved after these results?
The paper is not claiming the system's problem is finished. Caching every depth state becomes a memory and bandwidth bottleneck in very deep networks. So the discussion section proposes bounded depth KV slot caching as future work. In other words, the method works, but scaling the depth memory efficiently is still an open problem.
What is the clearest takeaway at the end?
My takeaway is that this paper contributes a clean depth scaling primitive. It identifies why residual-only depth propagation loses information, replaces fixed dense connectivity with adaptive depth retrieval, and shows that the result is both trainable and hardware efficient. The gains are modest in raw percentages, but they are broad, consistent, and achieved with very small extra compute.
So the core claim is that deeper models benefit when attention can look backward across layers, not only across tokens.
Exactly. Mixture of depths attention turns layer history into something the model can query. And the experiments show that this extra retrieval path improves depth scaling without breaking efficient kernels. That wraps up this paper walkthrough.